In California, a large steel plant closed down. In New York, the walkout of thousands of newspaper printers left a gap in the daily lives of 6 million people. While not far away, at the docks where labor peace had been finally brought only by the shotgun settlement of a presidential panel, a member of the Longshoremen's Union sets the issue.
Automation, as I'm told, represents progress. Progress by who? By what? We've made through the toils of our hard labor over the years possible new vans, new machinery, new equipment for the steamship companies, which for the steamship companies is well and good. What does it represent to us? We're just thrown on a scrap heap.
The issue is summed up simply: jobs. Jobs in the face of the new era coming to the docks of every coastal city, every large printing plant, almost every large farm and industry. The new era of automation. And against the mechanized wave of the future, organized labor is pitting its mightiest weapons in a strike against automation. All America wants to know. A monthly discussion of the great questions facing our country. Presented as a public service by America's favorite magazine, The Reader's Digest, in cooperation with the Freedoms Foundation at Valley Forge. Created and produced by Theodore Grenick. This month's special broadcast, Automation, Are Strikes the Only Answer, is based on the article That Empty Chair by the Featherbed, written by Lester Veely, appearing in the April issue of The Reader's Digest.
This is Theodore Grenick speaking to you from Pier 57, North River at the Port of New York. Each day, men report here to form the work gangs assigned to load the passenger and cargo ships bound for ports the world over. For these longshoremen, as for all those of America's labor force, in almost every industry, conditions are changing. And the change can, perhaps, be crystallized in one word: automation. To some, automation represents the promise of the future. To others, men like these, perhaps, it is above all a problem of the present. But problem or promise, triumph or tragedy, the tide of automation is advancing on industry, radiating effects in all directions. What are these effects? How do they concern us? That's what all America wants to know.
A lump of potter's clay, a Red Cross emblem. What do these two objects have in common? Nothing really, except in a symbolic sense. The potter's clay will not become useful or beautiful until skilled and loving hands give it shape and purpose. Nor can the Red Cross bring much to a community or nation without trained and devoted hands which give it purpose and meaning. Yes, usefulness comes from the human touch, whether it's making a vase from a lump of shapeless clay or providing services which make our community something more than orderly slabs of concrete, bricks, and lumber. It's the human touch which membership and active participation in the Red Cross provides. Why not make your life complete and useful? One way to do it is to join and serve your Red Cross.
One can tell the history of almost any industry with the same kind of story. Human labor gradually eased by the introduction of machinery. Then, with the passage of time and further development, machinery becomes more sophisticated, to a point where human skills begin to be replaced by machines. And so, in a newspaper printing plant where lines of men once pecked away at the keyboards of clattering linotype machines, machines now exist which can be directed by pre-punched coded tape, one of the nightmares haunting the printers in New York, Cleveland, and other cities. All across the country now, as in the composing rooms of the Oklahoma City Times, linotypers, electronically programmed from coded tape, are taking over. Instead of the printer who once pecked away at the keyboard, the pre-punched tape now directs the linotype machines. One printer can monitor as many as 4 machines, feeding tape into them and watching for breakdowns. Wage earners no longer smash the new machines as English mobs did 150 years ago. But where unions are strong enough, they may fight the introduction of labor-saving devices with busy work, commonly known as feather bedding. They may insist on pay for no work at all, or as in the case of the printers and dockers, straws in the wind that could sweep the country, they strike.
My name is Teddy Gleason. I'm Executive Vice President of the International Longshoremen's Union and also President of the Atlantic Coast District. And as President of the Atlantic Coast District, I was responsible for negotiating the last contract. I've worked in every capacity as far as the union is concerned, and I've also worked in every craft in this organization over the last 48 years. In automation here, we are now in the most highly automated industry in the United States. The longshoremen are not against automation. The union is not against automation, but it's looking for the solution before many, many men are thrown on the streets on a scrap heap.
And there is no question labor leaders like Gleason have the support of a membership, suspicious and frightened of what automation will do to them.
I have 6 children. Now, if I have to go look for a job elsewhere on kind of automation, I have no experience in any other trade or any other industry, and I don't know where I'm going to get a job if this automation comes in and knocks me out of a job.
The attitude of the longshoremen is typical of many members of today's labor force. A blend of emotional concern for their own futures, as well as a cold, hard look around at the effects of labor-saving machinery on the number of available jobs. On the West Coast, for example, when the giant container van with its preloaded cargo first appeared in the late 1950s, the longshoremen refused to let them go aboard ship. The vans exceeded the 2,100-pound sling limit written into the contract long before the container van was heard of. It was nothing less than a Cold War, with the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union waging guerrilla tactics on new cargo handling methods and exacting heavy tribute in pay for work not done. Then in 1957, the Pacific Maritime Association and Harry Bridges, the union leader, hammered out an agreement. As the association's president, J. Paul Censure describes the situation.
The beginning of the discussions necessarily depended upon management's willingness to protect labor against unnecessary layoff of men and to protect their income and their job security. We arranged by long negotiation to build in certain work guarantees, certain insurance and pension benefits, as well as payments of money, in return for which the union agreed to give us a simple contract providing that we would not have to employ unnecessary men, that we could remove artificial work restrictions, and introduce labor-saving devices.
We do not believe that the West Coast was the solution. We believe 5,000 men, Class B men of that union, lost their jobs for $5 million a year.
We think it's working satisfactorily. We likewise feel that the union does as well.
We feel that we can solve this situation if we sit down and be honest with each other around the table. If not, something will have to be done by the government. Because eventually, with all mechanization being placed into industries all over the United States, we are going to have an unemployment list here in this country of 20 or 25 million people.
The overall problem of the effect of automation or mechanization necessarily is not solved by the individual type of agreement that we're discussing here. The broader problem of overall unemployment is not going to be solved by any single industry.
Although the West Coast Shipping Agreement perhaps points a way toward coming to grips with the problems of automation and labor, it seems clear, as J. Paul Censure says, that the situation in each industry will call for different modes of action if labor management peace is to be secured. From the standpoint of management, the real stumbling block in practically every industry is the same: feather bedding. The question of feather bedding may, despite presidential commissions and Supreme Court verdicts, plunge the country into its most dreaded strike. On the railroads, the railroads want to shelve thousands of workers who have no job to do, so management claims, on the modern train systems of today. The finger is pointed, for example, To the non-firing fireman, railroads are forced to carry in the cab of a diesel locomotive. Once, the fireman was needed to feed coal to the iron horse. Now, in the oil-burning diesel, the railroads say there is nothing for him to do. The railway unions insist the engine personnel cannot be cut for reasons of safety.
My name is Walter Carpenter. I'm a locomotive engineman out of Chicago. I work days, afternoons, and nights running a locomotive with a fireman on the left side of my locomotive at all times. I use him as an assistant, watching signals around curves, taking signals from his side when the men are working on his side. Not only that, if I've got more than one unit, I have to use him as an assistant to go back to the second unit if anything goes wrong.
There was a train pulling off at track 8, and a numerous number of cars, and a switching engine working up the lead. The slack ran in, and the consequence was that the engine was damaged beyond repair because of the fifth man not being on the engine.
The railroads see it differently, both as fact and opinion. And presidential commissions and the recent Supreme Court decision would seem to agree that safety would not be jeopardized if the railroads could put technology to work. The railroads claim the union's concern about safety is the camouflage for an archaic piecework labor system that has not kept pace with progress. The sick railroad industry, management feels, needs to take advantage of technological changes in order to survive and compete with other public carriers. But as James E. Wolfe, chairman of the National Railway Conference, says,
the labor unions, without exception, are opposed to such changes. Their policy is to attempt to compel the carriers to employ people who are not needed and thus handicap the efforts of the industry to operate efficiently and economically. On the other hand, the carriers are determined, as a result of the recommendations of the Presidential Railroad Commission, to end feather bedding, and that means that technological changes will be made.
Charles Luna, president of the Brotherhood of Railroad Trainmen, responds.
You people have all read and heard on television and radio of the feather bedding of the railroad man. None of this and none of the people who writes and talks of feather bedding has ever been a railroad man. They haven't gone out at midnight or 3 o'clock in the morning in the kind of weather we have every winter and performed the duties that these railroad men performed.
Feather bedding is costing the railroad industry and the American public about $600 million a year.
This question was asked in federal court, and the railroads has yet been unable to tell them where the $600 million would be saved.
The Denver Zephyr. A cracked train highballing toward Chicago. Management will cite it as a representative make-work practice because rules and limitations prevent management from extending the length of runs as the speed of trains has increased over the years.
An example of how that cost accumulates is the operation of the Denver Zephyr by the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad Company. That train left Denver yesterday afternoon at 5 o'clock Chicago time. The distance from Denver to Chicago is 1,034 miles. The railroad was compelled to use 8 engine crews to operate that train. The distance just referred to, the time consumed being 16 hours and 15 minutes. That's an average of about 2 hours and 2 minutes per tour of duty. The wage expense of the locomotive engineer was in excess of $217. That means that each engineer, on the average, was paid $13.36 for each hour of service performed.
They don't tell you the whole story. They don't tell you that they've got a certain time to report and wait for that run. They don't tell you that when they get to the other end of the run that they're there sometime 24 hours and away from home all that time, without any expense paid by the carrier at all.
Management insists, above all, on its right to determine the size of its work crews without union interference. A typical humping operation, as the railroads up to now have been forced to do it, is described by A.E. Egbers, an executive with many years of practical railroading experience.
This is the Burlington Cicero Automatic Classification Yard, located about 9 miles west of the Chicago Loop. I am up in the Yardmaster's Tower. Down below us, a humping operation is going on, conducted by a crew of 5 men, composed of an engineer and a fireman in the diesel engine, a yard foreman below me in an office on track level who lines up switches through a panel board, routing these cars into the classification yard. Right outside the tower is a pin puller who lifts the pin, uncoupling the cars to go over the hump from the balance of the train, when they then separate and roll down into the classification yard through a retarder system. The third member of the yard ground crew is riding on the diesel engine with the engineer and the fireman. Experienced railroad officers feel that this humping operation and humping operations like this throughout the country can be conducted safely and efficiently with a crew composed of 3 men, an engineer, a yard foreman, and a yard helper.
The railroad unions, however, feel that from a safety point of view, these 2 men cannot be discarded. And so both sides in the railway dispute, unable to settle their differences by negotiation, are squared off, ready for a national strike as soon as the presidential panels have had their final say. Labor Secretary W. Willard Wirtz has summed up the problem for the railroad industry and others as the era of automation gathers force. Said Secretary Wirtz, and these are his words, "When employers and unions bargained over bread and butter issues, when a few cents divided them, compromises could be negotiated. But now jobs are at stake, and industry survival is at stake too. And these put strains on employer-union relations we've never had before." This year, some 2.5 million wage earners will be involved in union contract negotiations that presumably must cope with job security. Will the automation problem be more than these negotiations can handle? Are more crippling strikes inevitable? Not necessarily. For along with the plan developed by the West Coast shipping industry and labor representatives, a second plan has emerged out west. This one geared to automation and job security problems in the manufacturing industry. The long-range sharing plan negotiated by the Kaiser Steel Corporation with the United Steelworkers of America had its genesis in the bitter 105-day steel strike in 1959, which made the nation's vast productive capacity into a smoldering wasteland which did nobody any good. The 1959 strike was the first big test of strength over feather bedding and a disturbing omen of strikes to come. But here in Fontana, California, prompted by Edgar Kaiser and Arthur Goldberg, now a Supreme Court justice, but then counsel to the steelworkers, company and union, with public member guidance, were to come up with a plan. It was to take 3 years of hard, patient meetings and negotiations. Recently in Washington, Edgar Kaiser was interviewed by a reporter from All America Wants to Know.
Mr. Kaiser, what prompted the development of the Kaiser Steel long-range sharing plan?
Well, I think the answer to that is, Bob, that we have run up against these deadlines. In other words, you've got a contract date. And by a certain date, if you haven't agreed with the union on a new contract, you run into these very long, costly strikes, and nobody gains. Everybody gets hurt. And we thought there must be some better answer. And the union people agree. And as you know, in the '59 strike, why, we determined and put in the new contract that we'd appoint a long-range committee and that their goal would be to try to find an answer to those contract deadlines.
Could you explain, sir, in broad terms, how the plan operates?
Basically, this plan is that all the people at Fontana, at the mill at Fontana, share in any savings that are made from an agreed base point. The first problem then became, well, what do you do when you cut a crew size down? You're going to expect people to be out of work. So we faced immediately the automation problem. Under this plan, if it's agreed, let's say, got a 6-man crew, and the union and we agree it can go to a 4-man crew, what happens to the 2 men? We have agreed that those 2 men will go into a reserve pool. They will not be discharged, and they will be in that reserve pool. They can do work provided it doesn't put other people out of work. Now then, they may either go back into the plant depending upon when a position is open. For example, we know that over a 20-year hit record of Fontana, 8 to 8.5% of the people leave every year by either voluntary quitting, by retirement, by death. So therefore, as that's happening at the rate of, as I say, a little over 8% per year, why then they can come back out of the reserve pool to fill those areas.
How did the men at Fontana react to the announcement?
I think the best answer to that was the vote. When they voted at Fontana, it was over a 70% affirmative vote. I think the people gain because they'll share in some savings that weren't possible if we didn't have the plan. Likewise, the company does, and so does the public. We'll produce more efficiently. I believe overall we'll have lower costs as a result of this plan, which means we'll be more competitive. And that's good for our stockholders, it's good for the public, and it's good for the people at Fontana.
Ultimately, then, the implication of the Kaiser Plan for all automated industry is that if an employee's job is secure, and if he shares in the cost savings, he will be just as interested in cutting out unnecessary labor and feather bedding as his management. Some companies make a real effort to solve the human problems involved with a technological leap forward. Among these is U.S. Industries Incorporated, whose chairman and president, John I. Snyder, Jr., explains the approach of his company.
This machine that I've just turned off is a typical example of the kind of automatic equipment that is moving rapidly into the world's factories. Human beings displaced by machines. What do we do about them? My company, U.S. Industries, has chosen to attack this problem by associating itself with the International Association of Machinists, an industrial union, in the creation and operation of a foundation on automation and employment. The foundation is financed by, in effect, dues which we levy upon the sale of our machines and which come out of our profit and loss. The monies so collected are deposited in the foundation, and it is then turned loose freely on its own, to engage itself in making studies and to attempt to define the problem and come up with possible solutions.
Will the researchers and experts come up with an answer that will solve the problems of automation in the long run? The trouble is, as Lord Keynes once said in another connection, in the long run, we are all dead. What about the worker here and now? In Washington, Assistant Secretary of Labor James Reynolds sums up the administration's view.
So that, A, we don't want to discourage technological change. We want to encourage it. But we want to see to it that the people displaced are decently cared for and trained for other useful jobs. Those jobs can only be created by broadening the base of the economy. The Kaiser scheme is being watched by all of industry, and I can assure you by those of us here in the Labor Department with the greatest care and scrutiny. We think it represents real hope for finding an orderly way to accomplish the transition.
Can the Kaiser Company and West Coast dock plans work elsewhere? Only time will tell, but there is not much time. If we are to have the benefits of automation, employers and employees must grope towards peace treaties which answer this question. Can the owner have his new machine, yet can the worker keep his job? Men of goodwill have found this answer, but they have found it by seeking a solution long before a strike deadline approached. This kind of forward planning can save us from further strike turmoil.
Hello, I'm Walt Disney. And this, believe it or not, is part of something to wear. Now that may be hard to believe until my friend here, Bill Justice, shows us who is wearing it. Now he looks something like this. He's tall, but not that tall. He's sort of skinny, but not that skinny. Oh, come on now, nobody's that fat. He's smart, but not too smart. Good, but not that good. And as I said before, he's usually wearing this. For you see, our friend here is an active member in one of the 600 boys' clubs of America, which provide daily guidance, recreation, and training in things that count for over 600,000 deserving youngsters. Every community should have a boys' club. If your town already has one, support it. If not, why not start one? Thank you.
However one feels about automation, it is here to stay. It is part of the American future. There must be both a short-range and a long-range answer to the crucially serious problems it poses. Right now, we must aid the casualties in the battle of automation, the displaced persons of the new age of technology, whose jobs are being done by industrial robots. Retraining, relocation, education. Help must be given in response to human need. And over the long range, in the years that lie ahead for America, we must make certain that new jobs are created from the greater wealth and economic activity of the country and from the new industries that the new machines bring. And now this is Theodore Granick bidding you goodbye.
These hands may one day build the world's machines. They'll drive a powerful car and perhaps send messages into the blackness of space. Important hands like these need to be guided, to be shown the way. And this is the role of the scout leader, to teach young hands to be useful, to be helpful, to be strong, to encourage the young to follow their faith. For all too soon the hands have grown and become set in their ways and can do only what they have been shown how to do. Strong are the hands of the Boy Scout leader, man of quality, sculptor of tomorrow.
All America Wants to Know, a monthly discussion of the great questions facing our country, is presented each month as a public service by America's most widely read magazine, The Reader's Digest, in cooperation with the Freedoms Foundation at Valley Forge. All America Wants to Know is created and produced by Theodore Granick. This is Phil Tonkin, inviting you to join us again next month for All America Wants to Know.